Welcome to Capital Gains, Yahoo Finance's unique look at how government policy affects your bottom line long after the presidential polls have closed. And of course, Tuesday night's eagerly awaited presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Lots of fireworks, lots of verbal jousting there, people looking for perhaps a little bit more on the policy, did get some fact checking in there as well. And of course, tying up the end of the night, even with a Taylor Swift endorsement for Vice President Harris. But what does this all mean at the end of the day for voting Americans? That's what we're going to be breaking down. Joining us later on, we're going to have Lee Carter of Maslansky and Partners. So we want to talk about this final rundown in just 50 plus days before the election. Got to bring in my co-stars, Rick Newman and Ben Wershkul, to see how they're seeing how all this plays out and if there is some policy that we can pick out from the ashes of that debate. So Ben, I'll have you kick it off.
For sure, yeah, big week, another busy week here for everybody. This was a week that kind of began very choppily for Kamala Harris, a lot of the sort of end of her honeymoon, and then we obviously had the hinge of the debate. One issue to flag that I think we learned a bit on, but as you noted, it was a little bit of a policy-free debate in a lot of sections, was energy. This is an area I wrote about this week and kind of jumped out. Harris at certain times sounded like a kind of old-timey politician where she talked about all of the above energy. Her phrase was diverse sources of energy. This is kind of a sort of further attempt to explain her flip-flop on fracking and sort of explain how she's changing there and what she would be like as president. So that's one issue I think to focus on. There was a lot of other takeaways. Trump had notable moments, and then there's the kind of overall conversation about how this changes the race that we're still getting set on. So that's a couple things to kick us off.
Ben, are your note cards empty? Or was there so little policy discussion? Because I know last time you were the guy looking forward to all the deep policy elaboration, and I was like, I just want to see a cat fight.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you have any policy on your note cards?
I mean, I think the energy one was. I mean, that was in the debate, and there was a bit. I think we got a bit on tariffs. We saw Trump try to have to kind of explain a little bit this charge of a national sales tax. Not the most insightful there, and then there was a few others. I think concepts of a plan of healthcare will be remembered. Not that actually is actual policy. So yeah, it was. You kind of have to sift through it for sure. You take 100 minutes of debating, and you can fit it on one note card.
So I saw a poll recently, and I can't remember if it was before. I think it was right before the debate. It was like 40%. So everybody kind of knows who Kamala Harris is, but like 40% of people said they don't really know what she stands for policy-wise. And I think right. She's been trying to convince her, what does she stand for? And she has this problem of the flip-flop. So I've been kind of writing and looking into these flip-flops. So there are three major areas where she has flip-flopped. One is what you mentioned, Ben. It's the ban on fracking, which was actually part of a bigger thing. She supported the Green New Deal in 2019. That was a ban on fracking. Everything has to become renewable energy. Never mind if we can afford it or if we can even find all the energy, we're just going to do it. The other is she used to back the Bernie Sanders Medicare for All plan, and she doesn't back that anymore. Instead, she says we just need to fix Obamacare, which is basically what Biden did. And then on immigration, she was much looser on immigration in 2019, and now, of course, the Biden administration has put in place, pretty harsh policies that are restricting asylum claims. So here's a question for voters: like, is it a bad thing that she has flip-flopped, or is it a good thing that she actually now represents views that are closer to what most Americans think? And politicians do flip-flop. Trump has certainly flip-flopped. He used to be a Democrat. Now he's a Republican. No one knows where he stands on abortion. He's taken so many issues on abortion. So it's not like Kamala Harris is the only one flip-flopping here. And I think what she's doing, obviously, is she's moving to the center because she needs to win moderate votes and independents. And so that raises the question: is she going to, if she gets their votes and she wins the White House, is she suddenly going to then become more liberal? And she didn't want to ban fracking, but now all of a sudden she tries to ban fracking. I don't think so. And the reason is, if she gets elected because she's a more moderate politician than she used to be, well, guess what? She's going to want to get elected again, and she can't get into office and suddenly become somebody who says, let's end fossil fuels, like Joe Biden said in 2019. So I think this is welcome. I think her flip-flopping is welcome, frankly.
I mean, it's interesting because in Trump you have almost like a known unknown. You know what his style is like. Obviously, when we were looking for some policy details, that concept of a plan on the Affordable Care Act. I mean, obviously the thing came into effect in 2014. You think by this point we'd have a little bit more than the concept of a plan. But when you think of some of the issues that were mentioned, taxes mentioned 15 times, jobs mentioned 14 times, inflation mentioned 11 times over the course of the debate, and then not the policy to back it up. So how do undecided voters even make a choice from here based on what we saw on Tuesday, Ben?
I mean, I have a slightly different take on this, is that, Harris, the first question Harris got was the economy, and she gave a laundry list of her plans. And you can sort of not like the plans or do like the plans, but she does have things that she says she's going to do on the economy. What I find interesting, I think it'll be interesting when Lee comes on, is sort of, what do undecided voters really want here? And if maybe they don't like the plans and they just don't want to say that, but it's, as you mentioned, like Trump is a known unknown, but there was one of the polls this week before the debate had 9% of Americans still wanting to know more things about him. I kind of can't imagine that.
That could be young voters. That could be young voters who never, had to think about voting for him before.
Could be, but then he's been sort of in their life their whole life. So I don't know. I think that there are visions that they're offering here, and Harris has a housing plan, she has a grocery plan, and you can not like it or you can like it, but it's sort of, I think she really tried hard, and like I mentioned, the first answer was a laundry list. So it's interesting that we're still kind of, undecided voters are still undecided.
I mean, this is a popularity contest, and there are certainly some voters who are going to vote for the candidate they feel best about. That certainly is true of Trump. There are people who don't really like a lot of Trump's ideas, but he makes them feel like somebody they want to vote for. I'll just add one other thing here. So basically, one of the few moments that Trump got some credit for is at the very end of the debate when he said to Kamala Harris, well, if you're gonna do all these things, why haven't you done them already? You've been there for 3.5 years. Now, that's a bit silly because she's been vice president. The vice president makes like no policy at all. But she did not answer that. And she could answer that question. One thing she could say is, well, we have done a lot. She could point out the things that Biden has accomplished, which are generally popular among moderates. An infrastructure bill. I mean, everybody wants an infrastructure bill, basically. He got that done in his first year. He handed out tons of stimulus checks in his huge stimulus plan, so I guess maybe they're afraid that will make people think of inflation. He also got the green energy incentives. Again, fairly popular. And the Semiconductor Act, when they can say, we're incentivizing domestic manufacturing. She did not do any of that. She just kind of deferred that question. So I wonder, the next time this comes up, I wonder if she would maybe improve her answer on that.
Well, I did think it was interesting that in terms of investors and analysts' reaction, markets didn't seem to be that enthused. It didn't seem to move the needle either way. But of course, we will be digging into more of what came out of the debate with Lee Carter, president and partner of Maslansky and Partners, on the other side of this break. Stay with us on Capital Gains. Welcome back to Capital Gains. We still have a lot to unpack from Tuesday night's presidential debate. Joining us now is Lee Carter, president and partner of Maslansky and Partners, to really break all of this down. Obviously, it was hard to look past all of the fireworks and all of the verbal jabs, Lee, but what do you think were the biggest takeaways from this debate, and who really has the biggest hill to climb from here with undecided voters?
So I think it was really fascinating because I watched the debate and I thought one thing, and then I talked to voters. I had a live focus group during the debate. I surveyed overnight and had a focus group yesterday of voters. And what I thought is not at all reflected in what voters think. So that's why I love what we do. So here's what I heard. Number one, most of the voters, whether you're a Republican, independent, or a Democrat, or even if you're undecided, believe that Kamala Harris won the debate. They were impressed with her presence, with her response, with her preparedness, and yet not one person that we spoke to changed their vote. Not one. And I thought that was fascinating because in many ways, you look at it, you can say Kamala had a perfect performance and Donald Trump was somewhat disastrous. A lot of people are pointing to some of the moments that he, he took her bait. He went and talked about dogs. He did all of these other things. And yet he didn't lose his support. So I think the main takeaway for me was this. People were looking to hear Kamala Harris's plans. He talked about how she did have a laundry list of plans, but in particular, they wanted to understand what she was going to do on prices, economy, inflation that was different than what the current administration is doing. And what they heard was a laundry list of things like a $6,000 tax credit, and maybe we're going to be able to get, some money towards housing. But I want to understand, when I go to the grocery store, things feel really bad. When I go to do all of these things every day, it feels really bad. You've told me you understand that it feels bad. What are you going to do about it? No one felt satisfied that she delivered that answer. And as a result, the undecided voters, and we had 8 of them in my focus group, not one of them changed their mind.
So, quick question on that, but I'm going to then add another question on the backside. So, what does that tell you about the undecided? I mean, they can't, if they're voters, they can't remain undecided until past election day. But this question about Kamala Harris has to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. Doesn't she do that just the moment she pops up on your camera screen? I mean, the differentiator here is that Joe Biden is old and Kamala Harris is not. Why isn't that enough?
Because most of these people feel really bad right now about the economy. Fewer than 1 in 5 Americans right now feel optimistic about their financial futures. People are feeling really, really terrible about where they are. So just a younger version of what exists today is not enough for them to change their vote. They're saying things feel bad, things have to change. And it doesn't just have to change in the ways that she's talking about. It has to change economically. They're also really concerned about immigration. They're concerned about a lot of issues that they feel like Donald Trump might do a better job on, but they don't want to vote for Donald Trump because they don't necessarily like him. They want to hear something that's going to make them feel like the economy is going to get better, prices are going to come down, and things are going to be more attainable again. And they're just not hearing it.
Let's just stick to inflation. Is that just a messaging challenge for Kamala Harris? So by what I mean is, if she just says something that makes people think inflation is going to get better, is that good enough, at the margin for the undecided voters she needs? Or is it not good enough because maybe they just need to see inflation coming down rather than hear somebody talking about it coming down?
Well, I mean, we have seen inflation coming down,
right.
So it's not enough for people to see it, because prices, what they're doing is they're comparing what their costs were today versus what their costs were 3.5 years ago when they came into office. So even though inflation's coming down, so it's not going to be enough. So it is a messaging problem, even though I think she's done an amazing job from a messaging perspective. With only 50 days into this, she's turned things around. But those undecided voters, this is going to come down to those folks. It's going to come down to Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, undecided voters right now who are really looking for an answer on this. They're struggling. They don't want to vote for Donald Trump. They're looking for a reason to vote for her, and yet she hasn't given them one that they can sink their teeth into. And I think that's going to be a problem for her. And I think it's really surprising, because if you watch the debate, you think, wow, she did much better than he did. But ultimately, when you come down to the issues, you look at some of the polling, he's still doing better on economy. He's still doing better on immigration. And he doesn't have to give details on his plans, because what people do in their heads is go, what was it like when he was president versus what is it like today?
So Lee, what does that mean for the next couple of months? What do you think Harris could do to kind of change this? Is it more plans? Is it more laundry lists of plans, or is it, as we're talking about, something that has to happen in the larger economy?
So, I think often people ask for details when they don't have a story that they can grab onto and understand. So they don't understand really what's going to be different. If I were to be advising Kamala Harris, I would probably tell her something like this. I would say, what you need to talk about is that the recovery is really about a 2-step process. The first step was after COVID, getting everything back to stable, getting everything back under control. We've seen that. The jobs numbers are good. We've seen inflation numbers come down, but that's not good enough. What we now need is to go into super overdrive growth. And that's what phase 2 is, and that's what her presidency is. And here's what she's going to do about it. It doesn't have to be a huge list of policies. I think it just needs to acknowledge that what's happened was part of a plan, and what's to come next is going to be even more and better. And I don't think that she's acknowledged that there's this sort of stalled period that she owns. She is viewed as, and a lot of people say, okay, she's vice president. Has the vice president ever been held accountable for these kinds of things? But she's part of the administration. She is the status quo right now. It's not Donald Trump. And so she has to paint a picture of why it is the way it is right now and what's going to be better when she's in office. And I think that would be one way she could do it.
I do want to ask you, though, about taxes. I mean, throughout the debate, we did hear Harris lay out some of her tax credits when it came to small businesses and entrepreneurs. And we also heard Trump talking about extending and perhaps deepening some of the tax cuts as well. He said he wanted to cut taxes very substantially. Is all of this moot because we still don't know what the final makeup of Congress is going to be? I mean, what should we take from this when we hear a lot of this tax talk?
Well, I think one thing you should take for sure is that the increase of taxes on the wealthy and businesses is wildly popular among voters. That is like candy to them. They want to see more taxes for the wealthy. They want to see more taxes for companies, and that's not necessarily a good thing when you think about it, because that is sort of the standard bear out there. But what I really think is we don't know exactly what's going to happen with taxes until we know the makeup of Congress, which is exactly right. But it is interesting to hear what they're saying so that we can get a sense of what might come should either of them win. I think ultimately this election is going to come down to how people feel. It's going to impact them personally in their day-to-day lives. And whichever candidate now can convince them that their financial lives, their freedoms, all of that is going to be better off under their candidate, that's who they're going to vote for.
Hey, Lee, when you talked about Harris perhaps using this, we have this is a two-step process. We worked through the first phase, next phase, next. Biden used to use the slogan "Finish the job." She can't just take Biden's slogan, obviously. I think we should have a contest for our vast audience. Everybody should tweet me at Rick J. Newman. What should Kamala Harris's strategy or slogan be for how we get to the next phase of whatever the Biden-Harris plan on inflation is? I want to ask you another question, though, Lee. So you're talking about the importance of flipping or claiming those undecided voters. So that's one element, but turnout is also another important element, just getting more people who might support you to turn out, which brings me, of course, to who else but Taylor Swift. Is her endorsement of Kamala Harris going to get more young people to vote for Kamala Harris and help her win?
I mean, there's no question about it. You saw the number of voter registrations, I think, was over 300,000 in the hours after her announcement. She's an influencer that has real influence. A lot of people talk about the importance of celebrity endorsements. Does it matter or not? She drives people's behavior. And I think that is something that people need to take seriously, because this is going to be an election that is really on the margins. So every little bit counts, every inch counts. But interestingly enough, Taylor Swift's base and reach is really with women. And so while it might accelerate turnout and do all of that, a lot of people say that this election is going to come down to men. And
she needs
it's
Travis
be young white
Kelce.
men.
She needs Travis, her boyfriend, to join her on that.
Exactly. Let's see what he does.
gosh.
Let's see who he endorses. But yeah. It's an interesting point, but I think it is going to help.
What moves the needle for men? You mentioned that, and that's been a through line.
Good
What
question.
what do you think moves the needle on that group? Is it more celebrity endorsements? What could change things there?
I just think it's a really interesting, and this is going to be something we're going to be tracking for quite some time, because the division between men and women, certainly young men and women, is huge. You've got a huge gap. More young men are identifying as conservative. Many more young women are identifying as Democratic or progressive. And I think it's just about what issues are most important to them. Men, interestingly, what we're seeing is young white men feel, in many ways, they're the moment they're feeling like the forgotten people. And so Donald Trump performs very well with underdogs. He's going to be their fighter. He's going to fight for them. He's going to make things back the way that they want it to be. And that's a message that really resonates with this audience. And so I think it would be hard for Kamala Harris to pull them over because they are really looking for, when you look at it, something like 78% of them are looking for change from the way things are today.
If more men were like Ben, they'd vote on the policy details. Come on, guys, get with it. Okay, we're going to put you on the spot, Lee. Just a very short period of time left. Who's going to win?
Oh, if the election were today, I would say Donald Trump is going to win. But it is not today. But I think right now that when I'm looking at all the polling, and I've very sort of carefully looked at all of the different averages and all of the swing states, and it is so close. But the thing that I keep looking at is in 2016 and 2020, in every one of the swing states, Donald Trump outperformed the polls by between 1% and 3%. If that same trend holds, he wins.
We'll certainly see what happens then. We'll circle back after November as well and see what happens there. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. Lee Carter,
Thanks,
you so
Lee.
much.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, gentlemen, we are now just over 50 days away from Election Day. What do we look at from here? What do the candidates need to be doing either to not mess up or to really firm up some of these policies that voters can really sink their teeth into? Ben.
Sure. I'm just trying to kind of get through the week. So I'll give you a couple of short-term ones, and then Rick can kind of do the longer-term ones. Two things I think are worth watching in terms of changing the trajectory of the race in the coming week. The big one next week is the Fed. I think if there's going to be a moment where Jerome Powell and Donald Trump really come and clash, it's going to be next Wednesday when, if he indeed lowers interest rates, that happens. So Trump has signaled that any interest rate lowering he's going to say is political, and it looks almost certain that the Fed is going to lower interest rates next year. And so this is kind of the question is whether how big this gets and if this becomes a big issue for the rest of the campaign, or if it's kind of a one-day story. One other short-term kind of way the race could change that I think is worth watching, not to bum people out, but is Congress. People don't realize that the government's going to shut down in about a little over 2 weeks if Congress doesn't act. This is a story that we kind of know how it's going to end. They're going to do a short-term extension that probably doesn't change anything and just pushes it past Election Day. But there could be kind of drama between now and then on that. So those are my sort of two short-term things to watch.
Ben, I hope you're the one who covers that shutdown drama for us, because I can't stand covering it. It's so much posturing. And as you said, We know what's going to happen. And by the way, just to bring this back to the election, Trump wants them to shut down the government. I mean, what an interesting thing to be doing when you're running for president, is to say, I'm trying to run for president of the United States because I favor shutting down the government. Okay, whatever. We did talk about inflation a bit. Let's talk about what is happening with inflation, though. It's going the right direction for Kamala Harris. So we got yet another favorable inflation report this week. That is the reason the Fed is going to cut interest rates. And they're going to cut by 1/4 point. There's absolutely no way they're going to cut by 1/2 point. And one of the reasons is that would make it look like they are trying to put their thumb on the scale for the incumbent party. So they're not going to do that. But gasoline prices are now around $3.25. We've had analysts on Yahoo Finance saying they could be down below $3 by the end of the year, and they will be below $3 in half the country by the end of September. And oil prices have been falling, and not because of anything Joe Biden or Kamala Harris is doing. It's because of weak demand in China. There's a little extra supply out there in the market than needed. So those are tailwinds for Kamala Harris. And I guess maybe that gets back to the way Lee Carter phrased it, if the election were today, but it's not today. We're still going to have some developments that are going to influence it, and those are some of them.
And it's hard because obviously a lot of voters already had dug their heels in at this point. And so it seems like whether the news is better about inflation or jobs or anything else, it does seem like it's not really going to matter, that it is essentially going to come down to those undecided voters. Obviously, a lot can happen between now and then. We're going to get a lot more inflation reports between now and then. So it'll be interesting to see what really comes up for voters, or who really messes up between now and then. Because as we mentioned, people have really dug their heels in at this point, Rick.
Yeah, whoever screws up the most is going to lose the election, I suppose. One last thing I'll toss out there is I think Kamala Harris actually needs more visibility. Everybody who was interested in her could see her during the debate. But if there's not another debate, she's hardly doing any interviews. So she goes around and does rallies. That's her talking to a rally crowd. That's not talking her to the American people through the mass medium of television. I think she needs to do more things like that. So let's see if she does.
Indeed, we only had that one interview ahead of the debate. So certainly more visibility would be helpful.
She should come on our program.
Yeah.
There you go. VP Harris, you are always welcome. Well, a big thank you there to my co-stars, Rick and Ben, and of course a big thank you to Lee Carter for joining us as well. Thank you for joining us on Capital Gains. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.